I know I say this with almost every teaching, but if we don't get this part right, the rest of it doesn't work. But I can say that about almost any of the teachings. These are all pieces of the puzzle. And if you've ever made a puzzle, it doesn't look right if a piece is missing. So you can't leave any pieces out. And so every piece is critical. So when I say this is critical, and you're like, but you said that about the last teaching. Well, that one was critical too. Whatever it was on, that one was what you needed to hear then. And so let's be clear on that. And by the way, I think as a matter of correction, I had mentioned something about redoing unity and division. Of course, I already did redo unity and division, but that was almost a year ago. And so I had forgotten we had already done 7 or 8 parts of that. So go and listen to that. Whatever it was that I mentioned it about last time. All right, so this is the afterburn. Okay, this is where we take comments and questions. Yeah, Kurt's already got it. Okay, this is where we take comments and questions about the teaching. So if you have any comments or questions about this teaching, specifically this part, if you have questions about other parts, we might incorporate them as well. If you have questions about anything that was more peripheral, then you please I'm going to ask you to be patient and contact us directly after we get through the weekend, Monday or Tuesday, send us a phone call or email or some other thing, but we'll try to get to those as best we can, okay? By the way, in case some of you are getting frustrated, because I know sometimes you'll be like, well, I sent you an email so many weeks ago. Look, I get hundreds and hundreds a day. I'm not exaggerating. I've shown you my phone with the 20,000 emails unread on it. And so just realize that unless it's urgent, like you need it to walk, I may not get to it if it's just something like, well, this verse always confused me, or this verse always bothered me. I don't have a lot of time for those answers right now. It's not that I don't want to answer you, and I'm not trying to be insulting or condescending, but the person whose life is falling apart is going to get my priority over the person that said, this verse never made sense to me. I'm just kind of, wanting an answer. Well, if I feel that you could probably still walk the walk without that answer, I may not get to you right away. Okay? But the person whose marriage is falling apart, or their career is falling apart, or they can't pay their bills, or whatever else is going on in their lives, they're going to get the attention because, quite frankly, they need it more than you do. You want an answer, they need something. Needs have to come before wants. All right, so please be patient. So I'm not saying I'm ignoring your questions. I may or may not ever get to them. If I don't get to it for a couple of weeks, you may want to just resend it, but don't resend it saying, well, I sent this question to you and you ignored me. Well, somebody else was in more urgent need, okay? And by the way, I'm not even able to keep up with those, the ones that are actually urgent needs. So please be patient.
Hi, I had a question, and it's come up before. You've mentioned that he was talking in chapter 5, verse 1, that he was talking to his Talmudim, and that was the context we should use it on. But then I don't follow when it says at the end of chapter 7, for he was teaching them as one possessing authority and not as the scribes. Well, because once he started teaching, crowds came. So he started off talking to his students, and people came, okay? And so it does say, I believe, I got to go open the book here real quick. Look at the beginning of verse 1 of chapter 5. But when he saw the crowds, okay, he went up on a mountain. Okay, and when he seated, his tall ones came to him. But guess what? The crowds figured out he had went over to the mountain too. And they showed up. So at what point in this conversation are they there? Maybe for all of it. Okay? But certainly by the time you get all the way to chapter 7, when it says that they recognized that he was teaching in a different way, like a prophet, like one having authority, well then that's something not his students were recognizing, but the other people that were in the crowd. Okay? But absolutely, it starts off with verse 1 where he says, when he saw the crowds. Where's the mic? Okay? Michael.
I am truly grateful and thankful for being under your instruction, and that I can't get. I get on the internet as well when I'm not available to be here. But you mentioned today about forgiveness and staying in an abusive relationship, and you stopped short of verse 31. Understandably why, it's kind of deep. But when he goes into his grounds for sexual immorality.
Well, the reason I stopped short of verse 31 is because I have a whole teaching on verse 31. So if you haven't heard that one yet,
okay,
It's called divorce, remarriage, and putting away.
All right.
And so I didn't go into verse 31 because rather than open up that whole thing, we already have a teaching on that.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll look that up. I'll look it up.
So look that one up first.
All right.
And then if you have questions, you could always ask.
Sure thing.
Okay. Because I don't want to now open up those questions because anybody else that hasn't heard that teaching is now going to be like, oh, I got a question about that whole divorce thing. So listen to the teaching called divorce, remarriage, and putting away. It's actually only one part, and it covers it very well, I think, and very thoroughly. Although I still get people commenting and emailing me who clearly didn't understand anything I said. So, so... I mean, they'll say, well, what about here where it says this? And I'm thinking, but I spent 30 minutes on that verse alone. Why? What do you mean, what about here when it says that? Okay, so please listen to it and follow along, and hopefully it will make sense. If it doesn't, you can contact us, but I think it's a pretty straightforward teaching.
In Matthew 3, verse 9, that you had talked about, the do not think or say to yourselves, we have Abraham as father, for I say to you that Elohim is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. Could there be a connection that he was attempting to get them to see with Ezekiel 36:26, where it talks about, I'll give you a new heart and a new spirit within you, and take out the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh? Could there be a connection?
I don't know. I'm thinking about if they actually connect. I mean, there's certainly, we could probably stretch it to make it sort of connect in some ways. He was really just talking about a haughtiness, thinking my bloodline matters. Okay, so it was more about that than the heart issue. I mean, certainly that's necessary to fix the problem, is that they needed to get that heart of stone, which was not willing to submit to him, changed to a heart of flesh so they could receive. But I don't think that was what was going on in Matthew 3. Matthew 3 was, I think, a connection to thinking that, it actually connects even more to John chapter 1. Now that you mention it, thank you. Okay, in John chapter 1, when it says that he came to his own in verse 11, and his own didn't receive him, but as many as did receive him, they came to them, he gave authority to be called the children of the living Elohim. But notice what it says here. It says, verse 13 says, these people were born not of bloodline, nor of desire of the flesh, nor of desire of men, but of Elohim. So in other words, it's saying it doesn't matter how you came to physically come into existence. Your makeup, your heritage, your lineage, your bloodline, none of that is what matters. Yahweh opened up your eyes. He called you. He opened up your ears. And he says, look, but not everybody he did that with would receive him. But the ones who would receive him, that's the old, many are chosen, many are called, but few choose to hear the call. So to speak, few are chosen. Okay? So here he said, look, he came to his own, but not everybody would receive him. But the ones who did receive him. And by the way, this is not talking about Yeshua in the flesh. This is all prior to that, because Yeshua doesn't come in the flesh till verse 14. So this is all the form of the Yahweh that interacted with all of them from creation, from Genesis, the first chapters when man is created, forward to this point. Okay? And so you see that going forward. But that's where John is trying to make the same point that Yeshua was making, that bloodline, lineage, all of that stuff is not of issue. Now, it is of issue from the point of view he expected more of those that had the bloodline, more of those that should have been in the know, so to speak, and, did not receive him, as it says in John 1. And so, but I like the fact that even if it doesn't always work, that you're looking for verses or connecting up things where there's similar themes in there. There's something about stones and maybe a heart issue. And so good connecting. Not sure it really actually fits, but it certainly doesn't hurt it, as clearly they do have a heart issue that could connect to.
You were talking about relationships and staying in relationship, or don't stay in a relationship that's abusive. But when you said that, I remembered Luke 6:29, when it talks about when someone strikes, you turn the other cheek. I have heard arguments using that to kind of like, well, you have to stay because you have to allow the person to have, another chance. I see the twistedness of it, but I would love to hear what you would say in using that, correcting the thinking, I guess.
Right, but this is
Again, we have to be careful of how we apply this. He says, we're in Luke 6, he says, but I say to you in hearing, love your enemies, do good to those hating you, bless those cursing you, and pray for those insulting you, and to him who hits you on the one cheek, or from the other also, and from him who takes away your outer garment, do not withhold the inner garment either. And give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away what is yours, do not ask it back. And as you wish men should do to you, you also should do them the same way, etc. Now, the thing that we're trying to understand here is the idea of in a situation, and we're not talking about in a relationship where there's physical abuse type of thing. He said, so a person loses their temper, you're in whatever thing, it kind of gives you a slap. And so instead of slapping him back, you say, well, if that's what, here's the other one too. In other words, it's going to guilt them. It's going to heap the coals, so to speak. It's going to make them, it's not the same scenario as we're talking about abuse. Okay, we're talking about more the idea of having a relationship where someone is taking advantage, fine, but he's not saying staying there forever. He says in that one moment, okay, if they says here, if everyone, the rest of it, he says, if everyone who takes away your outer garment, say, fine, here, It's like we always have the joke of giving the person the shirt off your back. Well, people used to actually write their IRS bill on the shirt off their back to show, this is what you're doing. You're taking my shirt. It's to make them see what they're doing. Okay, you hit me? Well, I'm not going to hit you back. You want to hit me again? Is that really what's going to make you feel better? Is that going to make you feel like a big person? Here. You want to steal my jacket? Well, here's my inner garment too. Is that what you need? It's really how it's going to make the other person feel and also show that you're not going to match strike for strike. But it's certainly not an encouragement to stay in an abusive situation. But here's the problem. The problem is that people will do, and this is very much consistent across the board, especially in the mainstream Christianity, take something and not ask, if I interpret it this way, how does that interpretation match the rest of the book? Did you follow that? That is critical. If I interpret this way, how does that fit into the rest of the book? That's how and that's why if people struggle like with Paul's writings, they're not a problem if you ask that question. Okay, I think Paul's saying this. If that's true, how does that fit into the rest of the book? And if the answer is it doesn't, then the problem is in how you're understanding Paul, because it has to. So when you're reading this part about turn the other cheek and offer it also to be smacked, well, how does that fit into the other parts of the book? And you wouldn't see the rest of the book teaching you to stay in an abusive place. And if it did, why would you follow this book? I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to follow a creator that would want me to stay in a place where I'm getting the beat out of me, emotionally and physically and whatever other abuses there could be. And so if any God or being would try to do that, I would never believe or follow them. They wouldn't get any of my love. Why would they get yours? The same idea of believing that somehow the Creator tortures people forever. Why would you believe in that? And even if you did, why would I? Listen, if that was really what I thought, I wouldn't worship that God. Why would you want to worship a God that would torture people forever? Does that match the verses that say that he is an El compassionate? His mercy endures forever? Is there anything merciful in torturing someone forever? So why do you buy into that? The verse has to match the whole book. Okay, I've often said, if there's something that says A, whatever A is, something, and there's like one or two verses that say that, and then there's like 99 that say B, the problem is not B. But that's mainstream Christianity thought for you. A wipes out all of B. Because we like A, the way we think it means, and we don't like B, so we're going to use A to wipe out B. By the way, the truth is that A really isn't saying anything different than B, you just don't understand it. But your interpretation of the first one of the A seems to conflict with like the rest of the book, but I'm going to run with A the way I think it is, being in conflict with the rest of the book. Yahweh didn't spend
all of the Old Testament telling you you have to do what I say, just to have Yeshua show up and say, it's okay, I did it all for you, forget it. If you actually are thinking and not just brainwashed, you would know that that's ridiculous. That makes no sense. But then you say, well, then how did we believe this? Because it says, our fathers have inherited lies. We've been given strong delusion. Without that, you never would have bought into that. Because it doesn't make any sense. And by the way, if you don't read that much of the Old Testament, you don't see it all that much if you're spending all your time in the New. And by the way, if you spend all your time in the New with a solid grounding of the Old, you can see it in the New. It's right there, all over it. But if you don't know what the Old said, you don't realize that almost everything Yeshua and the rest of them said, Paul included, was quoting from the Old anyway. And so then you'd have the right context. But it's a thinking process. First of all, I hate to sound very matrixy, but you got to free your mind. Okay? Yahweh wants you to free your mind from all of the brainwashing and indoctrination that has been done to you generationally for the last 2,000 years. So that you can actually see what he's saying and receive it correctly. I should have the red pill and the blue pill for you. Remember what Morpheus said, all I'm offering you is the truth. That's all our ministry is about. All we're offering is the truth. You know? One of the guys was quoting me on that a little bit on the Marco Polo. He was saying how in the movie where it says, so you're telling me that when I free my mind, I'll be able to dodge bullets? And his Morpheus says, nope, I'm telling you, you won't have to. Well, guess what? If you could free your mind and get in full faith and full belief, I'm not telling you that people won't attack you anymore. I'm telling you it won't matter. Because it won't affect you at all. It won't hurt you. They'll still attack. But it won't bother you at all. I don't mean like you won't be saddened to see it, but I'm saying is you will not be shaken in your faith. It will not affect your walk. It will not hurt you at all. That's just like Stephen when he's looking up and they're stoning him. He had no problems. He knew he was graduating. It was over. All right? And so there's so many great metaphors that you can get sometimes out of movies. It's really funny, but it's the idea of we are basically, in a sense, living in a matrix because we're living in a world that others have designed for us and told us this is the way it is when it isn't. I mean, I'm not taking it to the matrix extreme that you're really not here, but the way you see the world is often the way you've been told to see the world, and so you don't see it the way it is. And so you don't live in the real world. And then Yahweh pops your bubble a little bit, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this is not the way I always saw it to be. And then you try to tell people about it, and they can't because they're still in the bubble. He hasn't popped it yet for them. And so delusion is a very strong word. People take it very offensively, but you know what? All of us are delusional to some degree. In other words, we're not processing the world correctly. Would that be a right definition, Paul? Right? Okay, they're not processing things correctly. That's our psychiatrist over there. I want to make sure I'm using the term correctly. Okay? I mean, it's not a complicated term where, like, delusional means you're like it'd be in a straitjacket somewhere. It simply means that there's some part of what's going on around you that you're not processing right. Because you're seeing it completely, clearly in a way that's not the way it is. Well, that's all of us to some degree. And so Abba's trying to pop that delusion bubble. By the way, we know clinically that when a delusion is threatened, in other words, someone tries to pop it, people generally react how? Violently. With their voice, with their mouth, with their hands, with weapons, whatever. They don't like you threatening the world as they know it. This is why your friends and family members attack you. This is why the church you went to attacked you. You are a threat to the bubble. The bubble's kind of fragile. They think it's real solid, but it's fragile, and they're afraid that you're going to just go over there and touch it, and it's going to go poof. that everything is not going to be the way they always thought it was. You know what that's like, but you wanted that. You were ready for it. You were asking and seeking, knocking because you had that itch you couldn't scratch. He made you go, something's not right, something's wrong, I need to figure it out. Well, at that point, you didn't care what the answer was, you just wanted the answer. They're not ready for that until he does that to them like he did to you.
Forgive me if this is a little bit off topic. So going back to Matthew 6, verses 6 and 7, I believe, talking about prayer with the many words or the babbling or repeating prayers too much. I guess with that being said, can you help me understand the parable of the unjust judge?
Well, it's about you being committed and persistent to go and ask, as opposed to thinking by your many words, it's like the child is going, Mom, Dad, I want, and finally you give it to them because you're tired of hearing it. As opposed to showing over a period of time, I'm trusting you, I'm waiting for you, I'm just bringing it back to your attention that this is my situation. So it's not exactly the same thing, okay? Again, it's a thinking too. They think by their many words, they're forcing the issue. Like somehow Yahweh has to do what you say because you said the words over and over and over and over again. However, Yahweh may let you suffer through a period of time where he wants to say, are you serious? Let's see, are you still going to want this 6 months from now? Like I've said it to my child. Oh yeah, you want this now. Let's see if you still want it next week, because next week you're going to want something else. And so Abba may not give you what you ask for initially because he might want you to come back and say, well, I'm still kind of really want this. I'd like you to fix this or show me how to fix this or whatever it is. So I think that fits into the parable that you're talking about.
Last week, I think you pointed out in the beginning of Deuteronomy 28, that's where the blessings begin. It may have been one of your teachings I've listened to recently, but is there any connection or structure or pattern that Jesus uses in the Matthew 5 there with the blessing, being blessed versus, connecting back to Deuteronomy 28 that you've
yeah, I mean, it is a connection. I mean, when he says, blessed are you, he's going to connect it eventually to righteousness, which is going back to Deuteronomy 28, where all of those blessings are connected to righteousness. Righteousness being the original covenant. I speak, you do. That's what Abba says, right? I will speak and you'll do it. And so there is a connection there. Blessed are you, blessed are the meek, blessed, because you have to be those things in order to submit to the things that come up in Deuteronomy 28. If you're not meek, if you're not a peacemaker, if you're not humble, if you're not seeking after righteousness, if you're not going to do the things necessary to get to Deuteronomy 28, the blessings part of the chapter. So yeah, they're connected, good connection, okay? And we have to have you watch Beware False Prophets too, so we'll get you to stop saying Jesus. Okay. There you go. Because everybody in the room was like, you guys got to stop that. Don't react to people because they're just new. Well, I mean, they call it, he asked also, is it the Christianese to call it Beatitudes? I mean, it is the approaches that when he says, blessed are, so they call that the Beatitudes. But, what would it be in Hebrew, that whole section in there? I'm not really sure. I'd have to, I'll look at my Orthodox Jewish New Testament and see what they thought to call it. By the way, when I say Orthodox Jewish New Testament, it's somebody wrote a New Testament so that it would make sense to an Orthodox Jew. It wasn't written by Orthodox Jews as if it somehow is an older translation or something. It's just an interesting translation. And actually, I like some of the things that they've put in there in terms of how they've grasped from a Hebraic point of view. And by the way, if you run out to get one, you better know Hebrew because it's probably 50% Hebrew almost. I mean, most of the words are, the key points and the key words are always in Hebrew. Okay? So they're not going, as a matter of fact, Kisei was probably in there instead of thrown in places, but emunah instead of belief. I mean, there's going to talk about things from the way an Orthodox Jew would understand it. So I could look there to see what some of the Hebrew might be there selectively. Matthew, I could look at the Shem Tov, which again, we don't know when that actually comes from or is dated from because all of the copies we have come from like the 1300s, 1400s, or something like that. Okay, Inquisition time. So that doesn't go back far enough, but there is one that claims to be a Hebrew version of the book of Matthew, and see what the Hebrew is there. Of course, again, it could have been the Greek put back into Hebrew by somebody back in time, and so who knows, what accuracy that is. We could always look at the Peshitta to see what the Aramaic looks like, which does go back really far. But the point is that they're not understanding in Christianity the key phrase there, that all of this stuff sort of pins on and hinges on the righteousness part. And Christianese, that's a word that's definitely called, I would put it in Christianese. Christianese, by the way, for those of you that are new with me, is simply a word that no longer is that useful or functional as originally intended, because it's been used so much, especially in Christianity, that it's no longer connected to how it was originally meant. So if you see the word righteousness, you should understand Torah observant. But a Christian would never think that, okay? And so it's just, they may just think it's a high level of character or something, some sort of elevated thing. I don't even know what they would mean. Can anybody really give me a good definition of righteousness except what I gave you just now? No. None of us really could have defined it before that. Okay, that's what I mean by Christianese. When it's holy, nobody knows to say what holy is. Okay? All right? Now, if I say kadosh, you say set apart for the purpose of serving Yahweh. Oh, I get that. That's easy. Okay? But there are these words that we don't know anymore what they really mean. So the whole thing is that Matthew 5, the blessed are's, those are all hinge on that middle part there. It says, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And then he continues to show that it's about righteousness, because it says when they persecute you because you're trying to do righteousness. So it all hinges on, and that brings you back to Deuteronomy 28. Max, a good job. All right? Okay, Mac 1, Stephanie 0. Okay, so I'm teasing you. Only because I know Stephanie could take that, so you know. You got her back, literally. She's like patting her on the back. Okay. Robert, go ahead, because it's like already like 5 o'clock.
From Aubrey, just a comment. For a definition of righteousness, she suggests Deuteronomy 6:25.
Okay. Let's see. And it is righteousness for us when we guard to do all this command before Yahweh our Elohim as he has commanded us. Exactly. And I know I used that verse in the pursuit of righteousness teaching. But absolutely, that is a definition of righteousness right there. But see, Christianity will tell you that righteousness doesn't apply, because after all, Yeshua's imputed righteousness is all you need. Well, no, you need both. Oh, yeah, it's an Old Testament principle. It says dispensationally, not about us. Okay.
From Joel and Daniel Most.
If you've got a dispensation problem, come over to the office when we're there during the week. We can dispense other things. We can dispense with that thinking. How's that? We'll dispense with that thinking process. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
All right. From Joel and Daniel Most. The scripture says the law is forever and the word of Yah is forever. How do we understand Yeshua's words in Matthew 5 when he says that none of these words will pass away until all is done? Before you answer that, the next 5 or 6 questions all have to do with Matthew 5. Do you want me to give them all to you or just one?
Bring it on.
Okay. Cheryl, or Sherry L., wants to know in Matthew 5, who is the brother? A fellow believer, B, a sibling, or C, everyone?
Wait. Who's the brother where?
In Matthew 5.
Oh, when it says when you've had auto against your brother and you should drop your gift? Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay, I got that one.
Okay. Div Shah wrote and says, please explain Matthew 5:39. I didn't get a chance to look that up.
Oh, that's a slapping of the cheek thing. We already covered that.
Okay, and that was one of the later questions too.
Well, we covered it in a different book, but the same thing.
Okay. And Nolan Bibb wanted to know if Matthew 5:18 was connected to Deuteronomy 30:19 and 4:26.
If Matthew 5, which one?
5:18
was connected to what?
Deuteronomy 30:19.
30:19 and
4:26.
Okay. Anybody else?
In the last one that I saw on Matthew 5 was from Leanne, who says, is Matthew 5:19 backed by the examples given in Hebrews 3:7-19?
7 to 19. Okay, well, that's a lot. Okay. All right, let's take these sort of a few at a time here. Okay, so Matthew. Okay, so when it talks about the brother there, if you then bring your gift to the altar there, remember that your brother holds whatever against you. Leave your gift, therefore. Okay, I would say on the Peshat level, it's talking about someone who's actually in the Torah observant, etc. But really, remember, we're developing our character, so we should be treating all people the same. So I would say it's going to be anybody. Okay, if you know that you have an issue and you are at fault in some of that issue where your brother has something against you and you know why he has something against you. We're not talking about everybody that has something against you for no reason, and there are people like that. Okay, there are people that may have issue with you and you can't even figure out why in the world they have issue with you. But there are ones that you know. And you know that you're just being stubbornly not wanting to do your part, and partially probably because you know they're not going to apologize. So why should I apologize? They're not going to apologize, or it's not going to accomplish anything. So it's talking about, I'm going to say on the expanded idea that it's beyond just, but when it says brother here, it's specifically speaking about people in the camp, okay, initially. All right? On verse 18, okay, for the most father-son duo, okay, we are talking about one jot or tittle by no means pass away until all is done. When all is done, we're talking about the end of chapter 20 of Revelation. There will be no more sin and no more death. And so everybody will already have had changed in their character to also be walking, talking, living Torahs, because that's our goal and our destiny is to become walking, talking, living Torahs. And so there will no longer be a need for something that everybody now has incorporated as a part of who they are. So it's not that it will be done away with. It'll actually be completed in what it was meant to accomplish, which is a world that completely functions in Torah observance. And that's where you are in Revelation 21. So hopefully that makes some sense. Connecting it to Deuteronomy 30:19, because we're dealing with the same verse. I've called the heavens and earth as witness against you today. I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, yes, exactly. Yes, I did quote that actually. I did mention that. I just didn't tell you what verse it was, but yes. When it talks about calling the heavens and earth as witnesses, and the idea that you would be choosing Torah observance, choosing life. And then from chapter 4 and verse 26, I'm assuming that's still in Deuteronomy. Again, I call the heavens and earth to witness against you today, that you soon completely perish from the land which you pass over, and you do not prolong your days in it, but are completely destroyed. Okay, but this is based on verse 25, which says that when you go into the land and shall do corruptly. Yes, if you break the law, you do corruptly, then you shall certainly perish, and the heavens and earth are as witness against that. By the way, since heavens and earth are witness against it, doing corruptly, as long as there's a heaven and an earth, still brings the cursing. Okay, so the doing corruptly, when there's still a heaven and earth, what does corruptly mean? Breaking of Torah. So that backs it up. Thank you. That was from Nolan, I believe. And then lastly, let's see. We may not be able to get this worked out unless I can skim it real quickly and figure out where Leanne was going, because it's a lot of verses, but let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, so yes, okay, so Hebrews 3 is linking together also, I think she was saying with verse 19, when it talks about whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands. Okay, so what it's saying here in chapter 3, 7 and 19, it says, therefore, as the set-apart Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. And continuing, he says, look out, brothers, lest there be any of you a wicked heart of unbelief and falling away from the living Elohim. That's verse 12. But encourage one another daily, saying today, lest any of you be hardened by the deceivableness of sin. For we became partakers of Messiah if we hold fast the beginning of our trust firm to the end. while it is said today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Was it not all that came out of Egypt, led by Moshe? And with whom was he grieved for 40 years? Or was it not those who sinned? Okay, so, and to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? But those who did not obey. So it's connecting, again, those curses to Torah breaking. All right, so those that would do, those who would not keep, and as well as teach not to keep. So yeah, there's definitely some connection there as well. It all talks about a mindset that was of rebellion. Okay, I'm not going to do what he said. I'm going to do it my way. And Paul's trying to say, well, not Paul, whoever wrote Hebrews is trying to say, this is the same problem today as it was back then. Nothing's changed. You know what they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. All right, we're a long time from when they were in Egypt coming out and going in the wilderness, and yet in Hebrews this was a problem. Guess what? Nothing's different today. Same problem, same issues. All right, that's going to cover it. We good? Nope. Okay, we're not good.
From Billy Ackley, he wants to know, how do you balance accountability with forgiveness when an uncorrected, non-repentant behavior will or may tear a congregation apart?
All right, look, it's the leadership's responsibility to deal with a person that has behavior that is potentially tearing apart a congregation. It's then leadership's responsibility, after isolating the person so that they can no longer hurt the congregation, to give them in the same process the path back. In other words, tell them, this is what you'll need to do if you want to be restored. We may have to ask you to leave the camp because you're hurting the camp, but that's okay. We're going to tell you what you need to do to come back. We don't want you to stay out there forever. They're going to have to demonstrate repentance and fruit worthy of repentance. Fruit worthy of repentance, so that they are not just going to come back and do the same thing again just because they said whatever magic words that they thought you needed to hear. But that's the leadership's problem. And the problem is, of course, that most places don't have any actual leadership that knows what they're doing. So I don't know what to say for that. Okay? Because the leadership won't throw people out that need to be put out, and they won't do it in a loving way that explains to them why they're doing it and how to get back in. Okay? They'll throw them out sometimes, but they're not going to tell them we're not just, mad, because they'll get angry and offended and they'll throw them out. Instead of saying, hey, we'd love for you to come back. This is what you'll need to do to come back. But as long as you're still doing this, you can't do that over here. Go ahead.
All right. Just two more. One, I think, is a rhetorical question from One Heart of Van Ruin. Some food for thought. How will you recognize the lawless one if you have been taught the law is done away with?
That's true. It's hard to identify the lawless one. If the law's been done away with, then nobody's keeping it, so then who's the lawless one? Well, they're thinking the stuff that they don't like, murder and rape and whatever. They're thinking it's going to be this openly, overtly obvious thing. They're not reading the verses. Remember I said that the verses all have to fit together? How about the verses that say that, the minions of Hasatan would look like angels of light? That Hasatan himself would appear like you think he's Yeshua. Okay, like God himself. You would think that's how impressive. See, they're missing those connections. They're thinking the red tail and the red horns and the openly obvious, scary-looking dude. Really, we're looking for one who's promoting and teaching and encouraging Torah breaking.
And from Nate Taylor, what are you saying, Rabbi? That I can dodge the fiery darts of the enemy?
Nate Taylor's the one that had the line about, you trying to say that I won't have to? I'm saying, my young disciple, that you won't have to when you get there. All right. But that's what Yeshua says, basically. You don't have to worry about all these things. By why? By counting it nothing compared to what is being offered. That's what Yeshua said, right? He was even the suffering of the shame, and it's really a shame thing to put someone on a crucifixion. The crucifixion was meant to be a big public shaming. It's supposed to be the most shameful of ways to kill somebody and to embarrass the family and everything else by putting them up there in public. And he was willing to go through all of that because of what was being on the other side of that, what was being offered to him, what he knew was coming. Well, that's the same with us. What are you willing to suffer and go through knowing what he's offering us?
From Sherry Heights, on forgiveness, what is meant in Luke 7:4, 7 times in a day, and Matthew 18:21, 70 times 7? Okay. I don't think you actually covered those verses. I think that might be why I skipped it.
But those are the verses that are just trying to give you the idea of, look, there's no limit to the level of forgiveness. Okay, when he tells you 70 times 7, it's not like he wants you to count to 490, okay? And just to figure out, because if you're going to start counting to get to 490, I mean, then you really have some other issues. What he's saying is, just keep forgiving, keep forgiving. However, we should not keep putting ourselves back in the same place so it's going on 490 times. Okay? Use wisdom in addition to forgiveness. How many times does a person have to slap you in the face before you walk over and decide, I'm not going to stand in front of that person if they're going to slap me in the face or kick me in the shin or whatever they're going to do? I've seen little kids that'll do that. You walk up to them, they're constantly hitting you or kicking you. Guess what? I'm not going to stand next to that kid anymore. I forgive them. But if every time I walk by they're going to kick me, I might not stand near them again. Or at least until I know they're done with that little phase of their life. Okay, so wisdom is the part that's missing in a lot of this. But yes, those forgiveness verses are talking about you need to forgive without limit. In other words, there's no limit that when you reach it, you say, okay, now I don't have to forgive. There's another piece to it, though, where the wisdom will dictate you're avoiding putting yourself back in the situation where it keeps happening. And that's all I can give you on that. Are we good?